Welcome to Marathonology. Marathonology is a program about facing the destructive patterns of our lives and finding principles how to break those patterns. We are focusing on the principles behind the 12 steps, which are primarily known from the AA environment. Today you are going to meet psychologist Vibeke Frederiksen, who will guide us into some of the major problems that we face connected to this step and also show us practical ways as to how to work with it. I will give you an introduction to the principles behind the step and also show you how it relates to the Bible. And we have arrived at step number 8, and it sounds like this. We made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all.
In the 8th step, we make a list with the names of all the people we hurted in our lives. And the goal of all this is that we do everything we can to improve our relations. Very often when we work on relations to other people, we are trying to have a good talk with them and try to straighten things out and end up with a mutual understanding. The problem is that very often that is not possible. The very same persons that we hurted us, and it makes the conversation very sensitive. And many of us had the experience that we ended up being more hurt than we were in the beginning when we had tried this. That is the reason that when we go into the 8th step, we do something totally different. In the 8th step, we try to be responsible for the part of relationships where we are guilty, no matter what other people have done towards us. So when we make this list, we make sure what we have done towards other people, but we do not go into what other people have done towards us. A good way to work with this is to reflect on how these situations influences us, so we can be calmed down and be willing to apologize when we need that, and give up this longing for being understood, seen and heard ourselves, and instead be focused on how we can apologize and how we can show understanding to this other person which we hurted in our lives. I can already reveal that we will use this list later during the steps, but right now the only thing we focus on is writing the list. What we do is we try to reflect on the feelings and the thoughts that comes to our mind when we think of those occasions, because it's very important that if we are to apologize to other people, we cannot be mad or angry or eager to have things our way. So we have to be calmed down and to be able to apologize to other people. For many of us, also this step is difficult, and I will encourage you to make sure that you have people in your group around you to support you during the work with the 8th step.
Step 8 is formulated like this. We made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. It's quite a powerful statement, isn't it? It's important for us to take notice of the fact that we are not saying that we are willing, but that we in this step become willing to make amends. So again, we are entering into a process, not into a place where we necessarily are right now, but at a place where we can see that we need to go there. Jesus is teaching about this area as one of the very important areas of our lives, how we deal with each other. And up till this point in the process, we have been looking at our relationship to ourselves, our relationship to God, and now it's time to look at our relationships to other people, to look into the eye and see how did we harm them, And how many people are we talking about, and to what degree have we harmed them, and what do we owe them? When Jesus teaches about this at one point, he talks about a servant who had a great debt to his master. And this debt was totally impossible to pay for this servant. No matter how much he would struggle, he would never be able to pay this debt. At one point, the master calls the servant, and the servant is just miserable in front of the master, and the master pities the servant and ends up relieving him of all his debt. The servant leaves the master, and right after this incident, he meets one of his fellow servants, and he grabs him and he says to him, "You should pay me what you owe," even though that amount was very small compared to the amount that he has just been relieved of. And when this servant is not able to pay his debt, he takes his colleague and he brings him to the police, and he is put into prison. And when the master hears about this, he takes the first servant back into his presence, and he say, "Because you did this, now you need to pay all your debt to me." The point of Jesus is that we have received such a great forgiveness at our Heavenly Father, so we have a moral debt actually to forgive everyone that has harmed us. So this is a place that we are struggling right now in the process. This is what we're dealing with. The moral debt that we have towards one another. How do we deal with this, and how do we dig into this to kind of let it transform us, to make us willing to do amends to the people that we have harmed? One of the persons listening to Jesus was the Apostle John. And John himself was transformed by the love of Jesus, and that transformed his relationships, both to God, to himself, and towards other people. He used to be a man of great temper, and he used to be very unforgiving in his behavior. But somehow that was changed. So at the end of the day, when he becomes old, he's been called the Apostle of Love. And one of the sentences that we hear from John is the following: "This is love, not that we love God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins." Dear friends, since God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us, and his love is made complete in us. In many ways, this verse represents what we have been going through in our process. That many of us have reached a state right now where we can say that we love God, at least to some degree, has to do with the fact that we have experienced the mercy and the love of God through the process that we have been going through. We have really seen that he loved us first, that when we came to him with our confession, he did not reject us, but he received us and he showed us love. So it was God who loved us first. It was he who sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice, and because of that, we are where we are today. We were actually not able to love, maybe even though we wanted to. We found that our love to God, our love to other people, and even our love to ourselves was insufficient. We found ourselves in grave need of the love of God, that love would be able to transform us and affect us in a way that we would be able to love ourselves, to love God, and to love other people. The natural consequence of all this love talk is that since God has loved us in such a way that he has, we are actually indebted in the way that we need to love one another. So we kind of hear the story of the indebted servant as an echo behind what we read from John in these verses. There is no doubt in our mind what the servant should have done was to forgive his fellow servant as he himself had received forgiveness. And even though it's not our forgiveness that is at play in this part of the process, it's still crucial that we deal with this, because to many of us, going to the people that we have hurt is a quite challenging process. Many of those people would be people that have hurt us, And many of us would actually say that, well, the degree to which they have hurt us is much bigger than the degree to which I have hurt them. And should I really go to them who have created so much damage in my life? And some of us might even be in a situation where we would actually, to some degree, find that these persons would be the very same that were kind of causing the destructive pattern that became part of our lives and which have had so much bad influence on the quality of our lives. So it almost seems unfair that we should go to them. Therefore, we actually need to be transformed by the love of God. We need to really dig into the words of Jesus and the whole mentality of the Bible and see that we have a love debt upon us, not something which is connected to our relationship primarily to other people, but something which is connected to our relationship to God. But really, what is love? What are the images that we carry with us when it comes to this crucial area of life? Many of us would easily agree that love is the most important thing in life. And we know this from many stories, and we don't have to reflect so much upon that. But just think about the attack on the World Trade Center, which is in the memory of quite many of us. The last text messages, the last phone calls, they were not about, did you remember to pay the bills or remember to buy the paint for the house or stuff like that. They were all about love. They were all about how much love had meant between the persons who faced death and the persons whom they contacted through the phone. And it's very easy when you hear this, we all agree and say, of course the messages should be about that. Because when everything comes down to the bottom line, what really matters is love. The problem is that we rarely live a life that reflects that love is the most important thing. And there can be many reasons for that. Many of us have experienced hurts and pain connected to love relationships. This is both in connection to romantic relationships, relationships within the family and with friends and so on and so forth. And because of these hurts and pains, we kind of draw back and we choose to be focused on other areas and other things in life. Many of us, we also choose other pictures than the real pictures of relationships and the real pictures of love. Maybe we choose the romantic pictures of Hollywood and we start really to count on them instead of counting on true and real relationships of life. The fact is that we really want those real relationships in life. We really want the true love. But at the same time, many of us are afraid how we can be hurt again in these relationships. So what is genuine love? It is to be seen, to be known, and to be loved at the same time. It is to feel the love of a person who really knows me as I am. This is also one of the pictures that is used in the Bible. Jesus talks about himself being the shepherd and us being the herd. And he talks about that he knows his sheep, that he knows all our defects, he knows all our failures, he knows everything about our lives, and still he loves us. Still he accepts us, and still he is willing to sacrifice his life for us. That is true love, to be seen, to be known, and then still to be accepted and to be loved. Now, our issue here and our challenge is that we have been living with many false pictures of love. We have lived with many false images of how we thought life should be, how we thought the different relationships should be. So we didn't see our relationships as they really were. We didn't love them as they really were. But we loved pictures that we imagined of reality instead of loving reality as it was. And now we're going into this area, which can be very hurtful and very painful. We stop dealing with those false images and we start looking directly at our relationships. And we start dealing with the fact that we have harmed other people, that we are responsible for hurts in other people's lives, and we start dealing with this reality. For many of us, this is a big challenge. For me, this was maybe the most challenging part of the process. I had to write down on my piece of paper how my destructive pride had hurt my relationship to my wife, to my children, to my closest friends, and so on and so forth. And this was a really struggle for me to do this. It was really a pain to look it into the eye. But at the same time, I felt that there was a change taking place. I felt that some of the love that Jesus was talking about became real to me in a new way. And I started to realize that living in reality, seeing things as they really are, seeing my spouse eye to eye, seeing my children eye to eye, to live with them as they are and for them to live with me as I am, that kind of reality living is much better than to struggle with all the false images, to struggle with life and try to form it in the pattern that I want to form it in, but which has nothing to do with the real life or reality. I saw that there was much more freedom in living in this way, even though the path was quite painful.
We have heard the introduction to the step, and I will inform you how to work with it. What we do in the 8th step is that we make a list with the names of all the people we hurted in our lives. Next to the names, we write down the incident, how we hurted them, whether it was cheating economically or speaking respectless or evil words. So whatever you did, you write it down next to the name. We often have a tendency to forget about or leave out minor incidents when we go through our lists. I will encourage you to write down everything that comes to your mind when you work with the 8th step. Maybe you think it isn't important at all, but when you are reminded about the incident, it is very often because it is important, at least to yourself. So just write it down. In this step, we work with our willingness to apologize. And a good way to do that is to reflect on and share with your group the incidents where you hurted other people. When you do that, make sure that you talk about yourself and what you did, because that is a focus on the 8th step. Many of us experience now that we are not willing at all, and we might need to go back and again give our lives and our willingness to God and ask Him to help us be willing. This process also might take some time. Some relations are easy for us to think about and be willing to solve, but other relationships and other incidents might be very, very difficult for us. And it's all right. Make sure that you stay in this process until you finish your work. And finally, remember that all you do now is to write the list. Please don't take action on anything. Wait until you come to the next step.
I hope this program was beneficial for you. And if you want to explore this further, I recommend the book Marathonology, which is the textbook behind the program of today. I also recommend you to check out our website.